In 1967, the United States walked away from one of the most ambitious engineering projects ever attempted in the Arctic, leaving behind a frozen secret buried deep beneath the Greenland ice sheet. For decades, Camp Century was little more than a forgotten Cold War footnote, a strange underground city entombed beneath snow and ice. But recent scientific surveys using advanced ice-penetrating radar have revealed a disturbing reality. Hidden beneath the glacier lies not only the remains of an abandoned military base, but a vast collection of toxic and radioactive materials that were never removed. As Greenland's ice continues to melt at accelerating rates, scientists warn that these forgotten contaminants may eventually be released into the environment, creating consequences that could affect entire ecosystems and communities. The story began in 1959 when the United States Army Corps of Engineers launched an extraordinary experiment on the Greenland ice sheet. At the height of the Cold War, massive convoys hauled construction materials across one of the harshest environments on Earth. Temperatures routinely plunged below -50 degrees Celsius, and violent storms could erase entire structures within days. Instead of building on the ice, engineers chose to build inside it. Huge trenches were carved into the glacier, steel arches were installed overhead, and the tunnels were covered with snow that eventually hardened into a protective shell. Beneath the surface emerged an underground city unlike anything the world had ever seen. Camp Century contained living quarters, workshops, laboratories, a theater, a library, a chapel, and even a barber shop. Soldiers lived in heated comfort while blizzards raged above their heads. Water was produced by melting ancient ice, and electricity came from a portable nuclear reactor known as PM-2A, the first reactor specifically designed for deployment in such an isolated location. To the public, Camp Century was presented as a triumph of science and engineering, proof that modern technology could conquer even the most hostile environments on Earth. Newspapers celebrated it as a symbol of human ingenuity, and visitors described it as a futuristic city hidden beneath the snow. Yet behind the public image existed a far more ambitious objective. Decades later, declassified documents revealed that Camp Century was never intended to be merely a research station. It served as a test site for a secret military proposal known as Project Iceworm. The true goal was to transform Greenland into a gigantic hidden nuclear missile network capable of surviving a Soviet first strike. Military planners envisioned thousands of kilometers of tunnels extending beneath the ice, housing hundreds of mobile nuclear missiles that could move constantly between launch positions. Protected by thick layers of ice and hidden from enemy surveillance, these missiles would provide the United States with a nearly invulnerable nuclear deterrent. Engineers tested railway systems beneath Camp Century and excavated tunnels much larger than necessary for daily operations, all in preparation for the larger project. On paper, the plan seemed brilliant. The ice would serve as a natural fortress, concealing missiles while shielding them from attack. But the entire strategy depended on one critical assumption: that the Greenland ice sheet behaved like stable rock. That assumption turned out to be disastrously wrong. Scientists gradually realized that a glacier is not a stationary structure. It behaves more like a slow-moving river, constantly shifting under its own immense weight. The walls of Camp Century's tunnels began to deform. Ceilings sagged, floors warped, and passageways narrowed as the ice slowly flowed inward. Maintenance crews worked constantly to cut away encroaching ice, but the pressure never stopped. The deeper engineers studied the problem, the clearer it became that the glacier was winning. Even more alarming, the shifting ice threatened critical infrastructure, including systems associated with a nuclear reactor. By 1966, the Army admitted defeat. Camp Century was no longer sustainable, and Project Iceworm was effectively impossible. The base was abandoned after less than 6 years of operation. The reactor itself was dismantled and removed, but much of the remaining infrastructure was simply left behind. At the time, planners believed this posed no risk. They assumed Greenland's ice would remain permanently frozen forever. Future snowfall would bury the camp deeper and deeper until it disappeared completely beneath the glacier. Nature, they believed, would serve as an eternal storage vault. For decades, that assumption went largely unquestioned. Then climate change began rewriting the Arctic. Modern surveys revealed that Camp Century was not an empty ruin. Buried beneath the ice remained enormous quantities of hazardous waste. Military records indicate that roughly 200,000 liters of diesel fuel were left on site. Construction materials throughout the camp contained polychlorinated biphenyls, better known as PCBs, highly toxic industrial chemicals now banned in many countries because of their links to cancer, neurological damage, and reproductive disorders. Most concerning of all was radioactive waste generated during the operation of the nuclear reactor. Although the reactor core was removed, contaminated cooling water had been discharged into subsurface wells drilled into the glacier. Engineers assumed the radioactive material would remain frozen forever, locked safely within the ice. Scientists now know that assumption can no longer be trusted. Greenland's ice sheet is melting faster than many earlier climate models predicted. Rising temperatures are producing expanding zones of surface melt, allowing water to penetrate deeper into the glacier. Researchers have documented the formation of massive underground reservoirs known as firn aquifers, where liquid water remains trapped even during winter. This water acts as a powerful transport mechanism. As it moves through the ice, it can dissolve pollutants, carry chemical contaminants, and potentially mobilize radioactive material that has remained frozen for decades. Once released into flowing water, these substances no longer remain isolated. They become part of a larger environmental system. Hydrological models suggest contaminated meltwater could eventually migrate toward the coast and enter marine ecosystems. There, toxic compounds such as PCBs could accumulate within food chains. Small organisms absorb the chemicals, fish consume those organisms, larger predators consume the fish, and concentrations increase at every step. Indigenous communities that depend heavily on marine resources could ultimately face exposure to contaminants originating from a military installation abandoned more than half a century ago. The environmental risks are matched by a complicated political dispute. Under modern environmental principles, polluters are generally expected to bear responsibility for cleanup. Yet Camp Century exists within a legal gray area. The United States built the base under agreements signed with Denmark during the Cold War. Those agreements never clearly addressed long-term environmental liability. The United States argues that responsibility ended when the base was returned. Denmark maintains it was never fully informed about the nature and extent of the waste left behind. Greenland, which today enjoys substantial self-government, lacks the resources necessary to undertake a massive cleanup effort on its own. Meanwhile, scientists estimate that excavating the site could cost hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars. The process itself would be risky, potentially releasing contaminants faster than natural melting. As governments debate responsibility, the ice continues to change. Camp Century has become a powerful symbol of an uncomfortable truth about human history. What once appeared to be a triumph of technology now serves as a reminder of how poorly humanity often understands the long-term consequences of its actions. The engineers who built the underground city genuinely believed they had found a permanent solution. They trusted that nature would preserve their decisions forever. Instead, the environment they relied upon is transforming, exposing mistakes that were supposed to remain buried indefinitely. The lesson extends far beyond Greenland. Camp Century demonstrates that no waste disposal strategy is truly permanent, no matter how secure it appears at the time. Materials do not simply vanish because they are hidden. They remain part of Earth's interconnected systems, waiting for conditions to change. The Cold War planners who designed Project Iceworm feared a nuclear catastrophe arriving in a sudden flash of destruction. The irony is that the greater threat may emerge not through war, but through the slow melting of ice. Beneath Greenland, the abandoned city still exists, entombed in darkness, carrying the legacy of an era defined by technological ambition and geopolitical rivalry. It is a reminder that history never truly disappears. Sometimes it simply waits beneath the surface until the world changes enough to reveal it once again.